All right, so we're back, and I wanted to be totally done with this paragraph, this next one, but I wanted to show a few of my changes and reasons why I did things. So I got most of it done, though. So this paragraph so we didn't finish this paragraph, but essentially in this paragraph, we're talking about Alexander Pope spending some time in part two offering guidance to help each critic become better. And he actually says you can become perfect by reading each poem or book in the same spirit that the author wrote the original book or poem in. So while this is a dangling participle, and I don't think it's that huge of a deal. It's not like, I think in the grand scheme of things, if you were to pick like the 10 worst crimes to humanity in writing, I don't think one or two dangling participles in a poem is it. But if we really wanted to be, extra nitpicky, or if your teacher is just extra nitpicky and would mark you down, um, then we should probably change it. So you could say in which the author wrote the original. So let's read this now. So here Pope is saying. So here Pope essentially is saying that a critic or judge can become perfect by simply reading each poem or book in the same spirit in which the author wrote the original poem or book. In which the author wrote it. Simply reading in which the author wrote it in the same spirit in which the author wrote it. I actually think this is one of those. Well, first of all, I don't like using it that much in an essay, unless it really, really fits and unless it like truncates that sentence well. I mean, there are multiple reasons, right? Plus, just hearing it out loud. And this is why I always, support reading, because you'll hear stuff. You'll say, "Oh, this doesn't sound right," or "This sounds right." Um, so in this case, since we're removing the dangling participle, and we're trying not to write it in that way, I think it's a better decision to write the original poem or book. I think it actually sounds better. I think it actually reads better. So here, Pope essentially saying that a critic or judge can become perfect by simply reading each poem or book in the same spirit in which the author wrote the original poem or book. So this is one of those cases where I think it actually helps this sentence that we repeat that phrase, poem or book. That's not a phrase. It's basically, but just this piece right here. These two words, poem/book, poem/book. Because now we're saying by reading each poem or book as a critic, right, in the same spirit in which the author wrote the original poem/book. So yeah, if we really wanted to cut out that dangling participle, I think that accomplishes our goal. So again, there are no, in terms of hard and fast rules, I think that, using that dangling participle could have been fine, but if we really wanted to take it out, I think this works fine. And usually I don't like to repeat a phrase. But if we have a reason for doing it and it makes sense and it increases the readability and it increases the clarity, then I think you should do it. I think it's very important. So, okay, so and then let's also go here. So we'll finish this paragraph in a second. All right, so this is when he's talking about the critic becoming better, which does go back to our original thesis. He shares specific guidelines on how one might become a great literary critic, by maligning bad critics much more harshly than bad writers. So this is a little bit long. This is our transition sentence. So in the previous paragraph, we talked about what we just talked about. So while Pope shows his deference towards authors as compared with critics, or as compared to critics, by offering recommendations, right, to help critics become perfect, by telling them to follow the author, he also reaffirms that difference by referring to the author and his or her quality original writing as wit, mentioning it 13 times in Acts 1 and 2. So I counted this. So I counted this, and let's just punch in wit. There's 17 matches, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 13 references to the word wit. So here you could say, as compared with critics, I think here's one of those rare, because this sentence is so long, and you want to, I think it's grammatically correct, but you don't want to say, oh, well, just because it's grammatically correct, I'm going to write it in that way. There are, successful authors that write super long sentences, but it's a matter of style, and if they do that all day long, and that's just what they do. But we're not authors. We're not writing books for fans. Like, we're trying to earn a solid grade on an essay, or in an essay. So I think that it's risky when you write really, really long sentences, even if it's grammatically correct. And if you're going to write a really long one, you should really know what you're doing, number one. And number two, you should do it very sparingly. I truly believe that. Or split it up, break it up into 2 sentences, sometimes 3 sentences. But yet, So here, while Pope shows his deference towards authors by offering recommendations to help critics become perfect, by telling them to follow the author, he also reaffirms that deference by referring to the author and his or her quality writing as wit, mentioning it. So let's say mentioning, again, I don't like using the word it unless it really helps with the sentence. Mentioning the term, so word or term, mentioning the term 13 times in Acts 1 and 2. And again, we could have typed out 13, but that's just, I don't think it works there. There's T, T, T. I just don't think it looks good there. And some might disagree with me. I don't know. I don't know what Strunk and White have to say about this in the elements of style, but I think a lot of it is readability. And I do think that it's just, a lot of it is just looking at it in that context. I think in this context, it's really important to use the number. Such a long word, and we counted it. I mean, we literally counted it, and we're gonna have to count it. So I think the number 13. But you got to pick one of them if you're gonna go to this as a piece of your evidence. To support your thesis, you've got to pick one of them. So. And I think it's helpful. I don't usually count words, but sometimes it works, especially if the word shows up over and over and over. All right, so let's see if we can clean this up. I mean, maybe this is the best way that we can write it, or I feel that we can write it, or I believe. But let's see. So by offering recommendations, so you could actually change this to truncate this to 1 word instead of 2 words. Well, Pope shows his deference towards authors. You could say, well, Pope defers to authors. I don't know if that really sounds as good, though. If you defer to somebody, it means it's like you're having a debate or something, and you're like deferring to the third person in the room to like answer that question. I'm going to defer to esteemed counsel to respond, or I'm going to defer to, yada yada yada. So he's not really there's not really like a dialogue going on in the room where you're going to like defer to somebody. Um, it basically means I don't want to talk. I want to defer to somebody else to talk on my behalf or to speak about this intelligently. So while Pope shows his deference, so I think that yeah like I guess we could change that phrase. You could say while Pope shows his proclivity towards authors, his greater support of authors, but then again, greater support than what group. So I think that this is the minimum, and that's again what I try to go over is like you want to state the minimum number of words that paints the clearest picture in the reader's mind. And it sounds hokey and kind of wacky, but that's really what it is. So if we can, if this is the minimum number of words, uh, then that that's clear. Then I think that that's our best move. So while Pope shows his deference towards authors by trying to help critics become perfect by telling them to follow the author. And I thought about, should we just exit? Should we cross this out and not include this? I think it's wrong because he's talking about authors. He's saying he's deferring to authors. To follow the author. And the reason why I put it in quotes is because if I don't put it in quotes, it's a vague phrase. It's a really vague phrase. Tell them to follow the author. Like, what does that mean? Again, you always want to think about the reader. Like, they're always going to ask, whatever they ask, you got to answer that question. It's like, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? Well, since we quoted this, we go back up here and we quoted it here. If I took them out here, this kid tells them to follow the author. Follow the author. Well, like, copy the author? Follow in the author's footsteps? Write like the author? No, it basically means read the poem in the same spirit. So, I'm trying. This is supposedly the line where I'm driving the point home that I made earlier, right? I always talk about like you want to have your quote and then argue your thesis by using words from the quote or the entire quote and then drive the point home. So maybe the next sentence you want to drive the point home. Well, here it's really difficult to drive that point home because all we're telling them to do is to follow the author, which is kind of a vague phrase, right? Basically saying to read the poem in the same spirit that the author. And we're like, well, what does that mean? Well, what does that mean? Well, I wanted to drive the point home by saying, essentially, he's saying that he's still referring to the critic, merely in reference to the author, and basically tells critics, right, to follow the author if you want to become a great critic. And we could say a great one, become great. You could say great at your job, because this is about your job. At your job, like not the author's job, not great at like writing original pieces. So that so if we just said if you want to become great, period, it's a little bit vague. It's like 88% clear, because it's great at what? Great. The assumption is going to be great, either great as a writer, great as a writer of original pieces, or great as a critic. So by saying great at your job, we're saying as a critic. So we could also say a great critic, but that's a little bit repetitive. Tells critics to follow the author if you want to become great at your job. And it's a little bit, yeah. So let me come back down here. So that's, that's basically to follow the author. And again, if we really didn't like this, we could delete it. And what we'll do is, this is another reason why perhaps a lot of teachers might say, you know what, delete that. Because as you get through your writing, if you've got a really nuanced thesis, it can get really tricky to try to defend both parts of that nuanced thesis, although blank. Most theses don't have although blank. Usually it's just Pope deploys rhyme and word choice in order to malign bad critics much more harshly than his bad writers, part 1 and 2 of his an essay and criticism. So I'm taking a big risk and I'm adding work. But I think if I pull it off, it can be very effective. It can work, and it's good practice. It's good to try to pull off things that are challenging, whether it's physical or mental, intellectual. So I'm trying to take a risk here. I rarely use the word although, but I'm like, hey, let me see if this works. But now it gets challenging, when you're trying to defend that, because your quote needs to mention that a little bit. But yeah, I think this is the best way. So then here, we'll post his deference towards authors by trying to help critics become perfect by telling them to follow the author. He also reaffirms that deference by referring to the author and his or her quality original writing. It could be original quality writing. And his or her quality writing as wit. But it's original, right? Whereas the critic isn't writing an original piece. He's reviewing the author's original writing. So that's the distinction I wanted to make. So I think it's quality original writing as wit, mentioning the term 13 times in Acts 1 and 2. Yeah, I think this works. The fact that he repeats this innately positive noun so frequently through Acts 1 and 2, so we can move this. So, because we're going to say the fact that he repeats this innately positive noun as opposed to a neutral or even a negative noun. Or even a negative word. So since we're trying not to confuse the reader, hugely important. Defend the thesis, be clear. Defend the thesis, be clear. Let's call this a noun. So yeah, we could say so frequently through Act 1 and 2, but then you're going to say as opposed to. So then the person's brain, the reader's brain has to say, what is this contrasting? Right? What is this contrasting? Or what is this amplifying? So let's move this. Let's move this phrase. All right. So the fact that he repeats this innately positive noun as opposed to a neutral or even a negative noun. So we're not arguing positive, neutral, negative words. We're not talking about specific words because we don't have enough time in our essay to talk about positive words, neutral words, negative words. But we are trying to make a point that this word, whenever someone says the word wit, if someone says, oh, he's witty or she's witty, that's a compliment. I mean, that's a blatant compliment, like societally, just in general, in our quote-unquote lexicon. It's a compliment. If someone says, like even wit, yeah, I mean, wit is just a pure, like, in most contexts, it's a compliment, So that's why I'm saying it's positive. So like we could have said complimentary, or optimistic, or supportive, or encouraging, or constructive, but they're sort of placed in the context of like human beings, and like emotions and all that stuff. I'm not trying to go there. I'm trying to be as clinical as possible. I'm trying to say this word is positive. The word wit is a positive word, which is a fact, right? And it's a noun. So I'm saying that the wit of blank, his wit, right? Or he is a wit. He as a person is a wit. In every context, it's a noun, or he has a lot of wit, right? He has a lot of humor. He has a lot of sensibility. So it's or not sense, that doesn't really make sense, but he has a lot of humor. So humor and wit, those are nouns. Those are nouns. If you were to say witty, that's an adjective. So it's a noun. And so we could say this innately positive word, but I want to make it a little bit more interesting, and I want to show the reader, excuse me, I want to show the teacher, the grader, that I'm thinking. So I'm also sort of, yeah, so it's a noun. It sort of replaces the word author. In time. So the fact that it replaces this innately positive noun as opposed to even a neutral, even a negative noun, as opposed to a neutral, even a negative noun, so frequently. So you could say a la witless, you know. Or you could say the opposite of wit is like a bore, the wit, the bore, you know. So frequently throughout Acts 1 and 2, further emboldens Pope's defense of the author as compared with critics. I think like simplicity is also key compared to critics. As compared to critics. Compared with critics as compared to critics. Interestingly, Pope elects them to deploy any single word or phrase to refer to the critic in a positive manner. Yeah. Because he doesn't. At least Acts 1 and 2. He doesn't talk about that. He doesn't refer to them as that. Hence, therefore, and because of this, you want to make these connective statements, these phrases. You're sort of like weaving everything together. So you're making a point, driving the point home, so you're making the point, you might add to the point, to your argument, and then you want to drive the point home. Hence, he clearly sets the stage throughout the poem. It's a bit of a cliche, but I think it works here. We never use it again. It's not like we're gonna. And also, if you're gonna use a cliche in an essay, try not to use it. I would always recommend that. But if you use it once in the whole 5-7 page essay, it's fine. Your teacher's probably not gonna mark you off. And sometimes, I don't know, like setting the stage, sometimes it just feels like it works there. It's just right. I don't know if this is necessarily like a cliche. Um, it's definitely something where I would say he illustrates again, So I could also mention that he hands Pope, you know, um, actually let's just release delete this here. So yeah, Pope, you know, uh, um, conveys. So it's Pope again. Pope conveys. You want to use words like conveys, relays, displays. Let's use displays. I don't think we've used displays. And I'm going to do a video where I talk about that. Like you want to use these words over and over and over again, but you don't want to use the same word. Like this shows, you want to use there's like 20 different words, at least 8. You want to use at least 8 different choices. Conveys, displays, relays, illustrates, proves, um, etc. Shows, obviously, but you don't want to use the same word over and over and over again. Hence, Pope displays again throughout the poem that he is showing more inherent support and complimenting of authors in general, so that when he decides in these lines, the lines like 12 and 13, etc., to use alliteration, which is the type of word choice, he again reminds the reader that he is emphasizing the author over the critic. So here we're driving that point home. then we're clearly stating why, like what we're talking about. Supporting, complementing. He decides to use alliteration. Let's not employ any single word or phrase to refer to the critic in a positive manner. And then we'll talk about the word choice. And then we'll talk about that. Will, wit, slash. So, use of alliteration. In these lines is, so he uses will and then work. So you could say his use of the following words. Right, so you don't want to confuse the reader. You want to, let's just introduce the words, and then we'll talk about them. So his use of the following words: will, work, wit, right? Will, actually, will, wit, with, will, work, wit, with, writ. Will, work, wit, with, and then wit. No, then writ, like wrote. I would say then writ. Will, work, wit, and then writ. All, you could say all are alliterative. Is clearly, so in these two lines, right? Because we're, actually, no, we already mentioned it. Like directly above here. Is each of the following words: will, work, wit, with, then writ. Is a clear use, right? His use is, you don't want to repeat that, right? His use is a clear use of blank, right? You want to say his use is clearly alliteration. His use of the following words is clearly alliteration. And once again, and then here's a situation where I would use indeed. I don't use it much, very rare, especially in formal research essays, but I would use it here. Indeed, both the alliteration and the use of the poem's popular word wit in these two lines clearly reminds the reader that even though Pope is sharing a recipe for critics to become perfect here, he nevertheless remains steadfastly focused on comparing the critic strictly in relation to the writer/poet, which seems to mean that without the writer/poet, the critic wouldn't even exist. This again illustrates Pope's emphasis on the writer/poet and not as much on the critic. So let's go back to our thesis. So sharing specific guidelines, yes, that's what this is about. Pope deploying rhyme and word choice, yes. But maligning bad critics, is he maligning bad critics here? He's not. We're setting the stage for it, but he's not maligning bad critics. So here, we're arguing the first half of the thesis, and we're sort of setting the stage for saying, hey, later when there's more evidence that he's maligning bad critics less harshly or more harshly than maligning bad authors, you know, um, he's basically setting the stage for that. So this is the fine. He's reaffirming the difference. Um, okay, because we could say he's deferring. He's showing support of bad writers more than bad critics, but he's not really doing that. He's just more deferring, showing more of his support. So we'll go back here. Let's go back and read our first paragraph. 10 cents are wrong for one who writes amiss. 10 cents are wrong for one who writes amiss. So the question, you guys might be figuring out what I'm thinking right now. The question is, are we going to leave the thesis the same? Or can we change it to something like, he shows his deference towards authors more so than critics, right? It's a broader argument, so it's harder to argue, but in this case, it might be easier to argue. And we want to look at all of our quotes. Are all these quotes saying that? They are. They are. So specifically, he's saying that, bad critics are worse than bad authors. But he's also saying that he's showing his deference towards bad authors. So we could talk about that. Most critics, judgment. Most of them are judgmental. Perfect judge. Yep. Okay. Because I think it's more challenging. It's a lot more challenging to argue what we're arguing. Okay, so now let's go back to our quotes. Okay. So we're going to our quotes. And wit as nature which affects our hearts. Whoever thinks of Paul this piece of C. Double meaning. I like this one a lot. This one. So let's just change the colors. If we're going to support our new thesis, what might be our new thesis, let's put it in green. In every work will guard the writer's end, since they can encompass more than they intend. Applause. Shaming language. Public fashion. Doubles private hate. We can argue that. We can argue that has to do with he doesn't use shaming language for the writer. And then here he bashes critics in general. Yeah. So this. And now we have more evidence. Blatantly says author's better than critic in the beginning. So let's check this out. Let's go back up to 1. And this is exactly how I would think. And this is exactly why sometimes if you paint yourself in a corner, it almost always goes back to the thesis. If this is so crucial. Right here. To tire our patience, then mislead our sense. 10 cents are wrong for one who writes amiss. All right, here it is. Yeah, we're like 20 videos in. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's change it up. Okay, so here we go. So, and I promised that I would like literally walk through exactly how my brain thinks, exactly how I would do it. So I'm not gonna like delete all these and like just start it perfectly. And nope, I'm gonna go through exactly how I would go through it, because this is how life works. This is how essay writing works. This is why it's challenging, because sometimes you go down the wrong road, and that's okay. That's part of learning. It's the same thing with math, computer science, same thing with physics, same thing with any subject. Same thing at your job. Sometimes you're doing something new that no one at your job has done before. You're trying like a new process, and then it doesn't work, and then you have to back up. So I promise you guys, I'm gonna give you guys like the raw stream of consciousness as I'm doing it. So I don't like this. This is this is not this is getting tricky, really tricky. So now we're gonna say let's go back. Pope deploys rhyme and word choice. All right, we're not going to talk about bad critics. In order to show deference towards authors, towards the writer, or the poet, author. And it's okay sometimes to have a parenthesis in your thesis. You normally don't want to do it, but it's okay. So here, let's just do over writers. As compared to the critic. All right, that's so much easier to argue. I don't know if you guys could tell where I was going and could tell that, but I don't know if you've watched this playlist, and you could tell it's like it becomes obvious, that like what, you're arguing too much, going down a rabbit hole, you got to back up. So this won't add too much to our videos. It's not like this, but yeah. So anyways, all right. So let's back up. So does this make sense? Does this flow? Did you post editorializing on these two aforementioned occupations? Pope deploys rhyme and word choice in order to show deference towards the writer or the poet author as compared to the critic in parts 1 and 2 of his essay, is an essay and criticism. So much easier to argue. So much easier to argue. Right from the poem's opening, Pope laments of critics in general as compared to writers in general. All right, so we changed our thesis so deep in this writing. Hopefully you guys aren't gonna strangle me. But yeah, I really wanted to show you guys that this is part of the process. So I'll see you guys in the next video.